Good evening, and welcome to another tranquil journey into the annals of history. As you settle in, finding comfort in your bed or your favorite chair, we prepare to venture once more into the past. Before we begin tonight's exploration, I invite you to leave a comment, sharing where in the world you are listening from and what time of day it is for you. It is always a profound and warming feeling to see how far our quiet community of nocturnal historians reaches across the globe. And if you find solace in these calm, meandering explorations of what has been, consider subscribing and joining us for future nights of restful learning. Tonight, we peel back the gilded tapestries of chivalry and courtly love to look beyond the tales of shining armor and noble quests. We are journeying into the shadows of the Middle Ages, into a world where order was fragile and fear was a constant companion. We will be exploring the stark and often brutal reality faced by one half of its population. This is the story of medieval women, not as queens or saints, but as ordinary people navigating a world that was, in so many ways, built against them. And we will begin by examining the punishments they endured, punishments born from a world that viewed them with a mixture of reverence and deep, deep suspicion. To understand the punishments, you must first understand the world that created them. So, let us begin there. Imagine, for a moment, that you are not where you are now. The soft glow of your screen fades away. The hum of modern life silences. Instead, you feel a coarse wool or linen tunic against your skin. The air you breathe is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and livestock. You are a woman, and you have been born into the 12th century. Your world is small, likely confined to the village of your birth and the fields that surround it. Your destiny, from the moment you took your first breath, was never truly yours to decide. Medieval society was built upon a clear and rigid structure, often described by scholars as the three orders: orators, those who pray; bellators, those who fight; and labrators, those who work. It was a world of priests and monks, of knights and lords, of peasants and serfs. But in this grand, divinely ordained design, you will notice a conspicuous absence. Where do the women fit? The answer is simple and profoundly telling. They did not fit into an order of their own. A woman's identity was not defined by her function, but by her relationship to the men who controlled these orders. You are a daughter. Then you become a wife. If you are fortunate enough to outlive your husband, you become a widow. Each stage of your life is a transition from one man's authority to another's. As a daughter, you are the property of your father. He decides your education, if you receive any. He decides your work. And, most importantly, he decides whom you will marry. This is not a matter of love, but of alliance, of land, of consolidating family power, or simply of securing one less mouth to feed. Your worth is measured in the dowry you bring and your potential to bear sons. When you marry, often as a young teenager, you simply trade one master for another. You move from your father's house to your husband's. Your legal existence, your very personhood in the eyes of the law, merges with his. This was a legal concept known as coverture. Under it, you had almost no individual rights. You could not own land in your own name. You could not sign a contract. You could not sue or be sued in court. If you earned any money, it legally belonged to your husband. If you were assaulted, it was he who would bring the case to court, for it was an offense against his property. You were, in a legal sense, a perpetual minor, forever under the guardianship of a man. This was the unseen cage, a structure of law and custom that confined you long before any physical restraints were ever needed. This societal and legal subjugation was cemented by the most powerful institution of the age, the Church. The Christian faith was the bedrock of medieval life, its doctrines shaping everything from politics to personal morality. And from the pulpits, in the stained glass windows, and in the sermons of every priest, one story cast a long and damning shadow over all of womankind. the story of Eve. In the Garden of Eden, it was Eve who was tempted by the serpent, Eve who disobeyed God, and Eve who tempted Adam to do the same. For this, humanity was cast out of paradise. This was not merely an ancient tale. It was treated as a fundamental truth about the nature of women. You, and every woman like you, were seen as a daughter of Eve, inherently more susceptible to temptation, morally weaker, more prone to lust and deception. The writings of influential church fathers, like Tertullian, were clear. He famously addressed women by saying, "You are the devil's gateway. You are the one who persuaded him whom the devil did not dare attack. On account of you, even the Son of God had to die." This was the immense spiritual baggage you carried from birth. Your very biology, your femininity, was a source of potential chaos and sin that needed to be controlled, managed, and, if necessary, punished. The church did offer an alternative model: the Virgin Mary. She was the ideal pure, obedient, maternal, and chaste. But this created a suffocating and impossible dichotomy. You were either a sinner in the image of Eve or a saint in the image of Mary. There was no room in this worldview for the complex reality of a human woman, someone who might be pious but also opinionated, hardworking but also tired, loving but also resentful. This binary thinking created a world of dangerous labels. A woman who was too outspoken was not merely impolite, she was channeling the seductive evil of Eve. A woman who lived alone and understood herbs was not just a healer. She was perhaps in league with the devil. This combination of legal powerlessness and perceived moral weakness placed you in a state of extreme vulnerability. Any action that deviated from the narrow path of silence, obedience, and piety could be interpreted in the most sinister light. You lived under constant scrutiny from your husband, from your neighbors, and from the priest. A misspoken word, a failed harvest, a sick cow, an argument with a neighbor, any of these small misfortunes could ignite the spark of accusation. And once accused, you stood largely alone, stripped of legal standing and burdened by a theology that assumed your guilt. This was the world that conceived the punishments we are about to explore. They were not random acts of cruelty. They were the logical, terrifying extension of a world that had already caged you in a prison of social, legal, and religious expectation. Now that we have established the precarious ground upon which you stand, let us examine the very tools used to measure your every step. The laws and doctrines that defined your crimes. These were not simply rules. They were the scaffolding of a system designed to maintain order, and that order was patriarchal to its core. The rules that governed your life were a complex tapestry woven from two distinct threads: the celestial law of the church and the terrestrial law of man. And for you, a woman in the Middle Ages, these two threads often tightened into a single, inescapable noose. First, imagine the overwhelming presence of the church. It was not a building you visited once a week. It was the entire framework of your reality. The tolling of the church bell marked your hours, from sunrise to sunset. The liturgical calendar dictated your year, with its cycles of feast and fast. And the parish priest was more than a spiritual guide. He was an arbiter of morality, a community leader, and often one of the few literate men in your village. The laws of the church, known as canon law, were believed to be a direct reflection of God's will. They were not open to debate, especially not by you. Under canon law, the list of sins that pertained specifically to you, or were seen as more common in women, was extensive. It began with the foundational sin of lust. Your sexuality was viewed as a dangerous and potent force, a constant threat to your own soul and the souls of the men around you. Theologians and preachers spoke endlessly of the snares of feminine wiles. A glance held too long, a dress that revealed the shape of your ankles, a laugh that was deemed too loud, all could be interpreted as signs of a lustful heart, a deliberate temptation. Modesty was not just a virtue, it was a divine command, a constant act of suppression. Failure to perform this act was a sin, and society, guided by the church, felt a divine mandate to correct it. Pride, another of the deadly sins, took on a particular feminine form in their eyes. For you, pride was not the ambition of a king. It was the sin of being outspoken. It was the audacity of contradicting your husband or questioning the priest. It was the vanity of spending too much time on your appearance or expressing an opinion with too much force. In a world where your ideal was silent obedience, the simple act of asserting yourself was an act of rebellion against the God-given order. Beyond the 7 deadly sins, a host of other transgressions were laid at your feet. Scolding, nagging, or gossiping were not just seen as character flaws, they were ecclesiastical offenses. They were viewed as disturbances of the peace, the poison of a serpent's tongue corrupting the harmony of the Christian community. You were also uniquely positioned to commit sins of a spiritual nature. As a midwife, you might be accused of practicing pagan rituals during childbirth. As a healer, using herbal remedies passed down through generations, you could be accused of sorcery if a patient did not recover. Your proximity to the great mysteries of life, birth, and death made you powerful. And in the medieval mind, that which was powerful and not understood was inherently suspicious and potentially demonic. Now, let us turn to the second thread, secular, or man-made, law. In the early Middle Ages, this was a hodgepodge of local customs, Germanic traditions, and feudal obligations. Later, as kingdoms centralized, these were gradually codified into more formal legal systems. But they were, without exception, created by men, for men. While a man's crimes were often centered on property, violence against other men, or breaches of feudal duty, the crimes for which you were most often prosecuted were tied directly to your prescribed role in the social and sexual order. The most serious secular crime you could commit as a woman was, in many regions, adultery. This was not viewed simply as an act of infidelity. It was a crime against property and lineage. Your body was the vessel through which your husband's bloodline and name were passed down. An adulterous affair threatened the very foundation of inheritance and social stability. It raised the terrifying possibility that your husband's land and titles could pass to another man's son. The law, therefore, did not treat male and female adultery equally. A husband's infidelity, while a sin in the eyes of the church, was often a minor offense in secular law, if it was an offense at all. Your infidelity, however, was a grave crime against your husband's honor and the entire social fabric. The law reflected this imbalance with brutal clarity. Other secular laws targeted your economic and social conduct. In towns and cities, guilds regulated trade with an iron fist. If you were a brewer of Alioni, of the few professions commonly open to women, and your product was found to be of poor quality, you faced not just a fine, but public shaming. If you were a vendor in the market and were accused of giving short measures or selling spoiled goods, you were likewise subject to public humiliation. These laws were designed to maintain order, yes, but they were also a way for the male-dominated guilds to control female economic independence. Finally, and perhaps most chillingly, was the way these two legal systems, canon and secular, could merge into a single, monstrous entity, especially in the late Middle Ages, with the rise of the great witch hunts. A neighbor might accuse you of witchcraft because her cow's milk had soured a secular complaint. The local magistrate, influenced by church doctrine, might then bring in an inquisitor. Suddenly, you were no longer being accused of a local misdemeanor, but of heresy, of making a pact with the devil. The secular court and the ecclesiastical court would work together. One would use torture, often legally sanctioned by the state, to extract a confession that satisfied the theological demands of the other. So you stood, caught in the crosshairs of two powerful, intersecting legal traditions. The church defined your soul as inherently flawed, and the state defined your body as the property of your male guardian. Canon law policed your thoughts and words, while secular law policed your actions and your womb. Every aspect of your being, from your piety to your chastity to the quality of the bread you baked, was subject to a rule you had no part in making. This complex, suffocating framework of laws did not just create the potential for punishment, it made punishment an almost inevitable feature of your life, the ever-present threat that kept the unseen cage securely locked. Now, we zoom in from the grand architecture of law and religion to the intimate, everyday spaces of your life. We enter the bustling marketplace, the crowded village lane, the shared hearth of a longhouse. It is in these places, in the small-scale interactions of daily existence, that the fear of female speech took root and blossomed into a peculiar category of crime. This was the crime of the tongue. Imagine your life. Privacy is a luxury you have never known. You live in a small, cramped dwelling with your entire family, perhaps even sharing walls or common spaces with your neighbors. The rhythms of your life are public. When you go to the well to draw water, other women are there. When you wash your laundry in the river, you are not alone. When you sit by the fire to spin wool or mend clothing, you do so in the company of your daughters, your sisters-in-law, your mother. In this dense social fabric, talk is the currency of connection. It is how news travels, how knowledge is shared, how reputations are built and destroyed. For men, loud, boisterous talk in a tavern could be a sign of camaraderie and confidence. A lord's booming commands on a battlefield were a mark of authority. A priest's sermon was the word of God. But for you, the use of your voice was fraught with peril. The very same act of speaking, when done by a woman, was viewed through a lens of suspicion. Why? Because an uncontrolled female voice was seen as a direct challenge to the patriarchal order, a small crack in the dam of male authority. Let us consider the specific offenses. First, there was gossip. In your world, gossip wasn't just idle chatter about who was courting whom. It was the primary means of information transmission for the illiterate majority, and women were at the heart of this network. You knew who was sick, who was in debt, which marriages were unhappy, which husbands were cruel. This knowledge was a form of power, albeit a subtle one. It could build solidarity among women, offering warnings or support. But to the men in charge, the priest, the reeve, the lord of the manor, this network was uncontrollable and therefore dangerous. It was an unofficial channel of news they could not censor. Your gossip could undermine a man's reputation, question his authority, or expose his hypocrisy. And so, the act of informal news sharing was reframed as a moral failing, a sin. It was malicious, disruptive, and fundamentally unchristian. Then, there was scolding or nagging. What might you consider a legitimate complaint today was a punishable offense then. Imagine your husband comes home drunk, having wasted precious money at the alehouse. You confront him, your voice raised in anger and desperation, thinking of your hungry children. In the eyes of the community and the law, the fault did not lie with his irresponsibility, but with your scolding tongue. You were disrupting the peace of the household. You were subverting your sacred duty to be obedient and submissive. A scolding wife, a shrew, was a stock character of ridicule and contempt in medieval stories and plays. She was a caricature of a woman who refused to know her place, and this caricature had real-world consequences. A husband was seen as entirely within his rights and was sometimes even encouraged by local customto, discipline, a scolding wife with physical violence. Your words were seen as a provocation that justified his fists. Finally, and perhaps most subversively, was the crime of expressing an independent opinion, especially on matters of religion or politics. If you questioned the priest's interpretation of a scripture, you were not engaging in theological debate. You were flirting with heresy. If you grumbled in the market about a new tax levied by the Lord, you were not exercising free speech. You were inciting rebellion. Your intellectual contributions were not valued. They were feared. A clever, articulate woman was often described not as intelligent but as cunning, a word loaded with connotations of deception and trickery, echoing the serpent in the Garden of Eden. These crimes of the tongue reveal a profound societal anxiety. A silent woman was a controlled woman. A woman's voice, when used for prayer or quiet agreement, was acceptable. But her voice, when used to complain, to share news, to criticize, or to opine, became a weapon that threatened the delicate balance of power. It suggested you had an inner life, a perspective, and a will of your own that existed independently of your husband or father. It hinted that the unseen cage was not enough to contain your mind. The effort to police your speech was relentless. It came from the pulpit, where sermons warned against the clattering tongue of idle women. It came from your husband, who saw your silence as a component of his honor. And it came from your neighbors, who might report your scolding to the local authorities, perhaps out of genuine disapproval, or perhaps to settle a personal score. This constant pressure to be silent, to swallow your grievances, to filter your every word, was a form of psychological punishment in itself. It fostered an environment of self-censorship and fear. Before any physical device was ever employed to silence you, the world had already done everything in its power to teach you that your voice was a liability and that silence was your only true shield. But as we are about to see, when that lesson failed, society had specially designed instruments of iron and shame to teach it anew. The lessons in silence, taught from the pulpit and at the hearth, have failed. Your voice, filled with grievance or opinion, was raised one too many times. A neighbor has complained. Your husband has reached his limit. The authorities have been summoned. Now, the theoretical disapproval of your community is about to manifest in cold, hard iron. Let us first consider the instrument known as the scold's bridle, or sometimes the branks. It is not a weapon of swift violence, but a device of slow, meticulous humiliation. Imagine two men, perhaps the local constable and a bailiff, arriving at your door. There is no polite request. You are seized, your arms pinned. One of them carries the object. It is a contraption of iron strips, roughly forming a cage for the head, hinged at one side, with a lock on the other. It is heavy, cold, and rusted in places. As you struggle, your eyes fix on the most sinister part of its design, a flat plate of iron, called the bit or gag, which juts inward. Sometimes it is smooth. Often, it is covered in sharp spikes. The cage is forced onto your head. You feel the rough, cold metal scrape against your cheeks and forehead. The hinge is closed, and a padlock is clicked shut, securing you within this iron mask. Now comes the worst part. The gag plate is forced into your mouth, pressing down hard upon your tongue. If it is spiked, the sharp points dig into your flesh. The searing pain is immediate. You cannot speak, you cannot scream. You can only produce a choked, guttural moan. The taste of blood and rust fills your mouth. The primary purpose of your crime, the use of your tongue, has been grotesquely and physically negated. But the punishment has only just begun. The device itself is only half of the ordeal. The true purpose is public degradation. An iron ring is often affixed to the top of the bridle, and a leash is attached. You are now no better than an animal. You are led from your home and paraded through the streets of your own village, the place where you have lived your entire life. The constable leads you past the market, past the church, past the homes of your friends and enemies. The sounds are a blur of torment. Children, who just yesterday might have smiled at you, now point and shout. Some may even be encouraged to throw mud or refuse. You hear the jeers of men and the hushed, fearful whispers of other women who know this could just as easily be their fate. You are a spectacle, a walking sermon. The lesson is for everyone. This is what happens to a woman who will not be silent. You are forced to meet the eyes of your neighbors, your face contorted by the iron mask. Drool, and blood perhaps trickling from your lips. The humiliation is absolute. You are stripped of your name, your identity. You are no longer Joan the baker or Elspeth the weaver. You are simply the scold, an object of public derision, a warning made flesh. After an hour, or perhaps several, of this torturous parade, the bridle is finally removed. But the silence it was designed to enforce often lasts a lifetime. Now, let us imagine a different scene, a different crime. Perhaps your transgression was not just scolding, but something deemed more disruptive. Perhaps you were an alewife accused of brewing weak beer, or a baker accused of selling underweight loaf scrimes that disturbed the economic order. For these, another public ritual awaited: the cucking stool, which, in its more violent form, evolved into the ducking stool. The apparatus is larger, more theatrical. At the edge of the village pond, or by the Rivera place of filth, where animal waste and refuse collecta, large wooden chair is fixed to the end of a long movable beam, which works like a seesaw. You are accused, judged guilty in a swift and informal public hearing, and then dragged to the water's edge. The crowd gathers, this time with a sense of grim festivity. A public punishment is a form of entertainment. You are strapped firmly into the chair. Your hands are tied. You are helpless, your body rigid with terror. The beam is pushed out, suspending you over the murky, frigid water. For a long moment, you just hang there, poised between the jeering crowd and the stinking pond below. This suspension is part of the psychological torture, a moment for the shame and fear to fully marinate. Then, the end of the beam is released, and you are plunged into the depths. The shock of the icy water is a physical blow, stealing the breath from your lungs. The water is not clear. It is a thick, brown soup of mud, weeds, and unspeakable filth. It rushes into your mouth, your nose, your eyes. You are disoriented, choking, your lungs burning for air. Just as you think you will drown, you are hauled back up, gasping, sputtering, shivering uncontrollably. Water and sludge stream from your clothes and hair. The crowd roars, some with laughter, some with condemnation. But it is not over. The process is repeated. Down you go again into the suffocating darkness, then up again into the humiliating light. 3 times was common, a number rich with religious symbolism. Each immersion weakens you further, both physically and spiritually. The purpose was not necessarily to kill you, though accidental drowning was a very real possibility. The purpose was to break you, to use the terror of suffocation and the revulsion of the filth to wash you clean of your defiance. When it is finally over and you are released, you are left a sodden, shivering, and degraded wreck. You may contract a fever or a lung infection from the foul water, but worse than the physical cold is the social chill that follows. You have been publicly branded as a disorderly woman. You are a joke, a cautionary tale. The memory of the laughter, the shock of the cold, the taste of the foul water, these things become the new, invisible cage that governs your every future word and action. We now turn from the transgressions of your tongue to the transgressions of your body. The world around you is obsessed with your chastity. It is not a private matter between you and your God, nor is it a simple question of personal morality. For a medieval woman, your sexual purity is a commodity. It is the bedrock of your family's honor, the guarantee of your husband's lineage, and a key component of the social order. To compromise it, or even to be suspected of compromising it, is to commit a crime so profound that it invites punishments of unparalleled cruelty, designed not just to hurt, but to permanently mark you as soiled goods. Let us first be clear about the suffocating double standard. Your husband's fidelity is a suggestion. Yours is an absolute requirement. A nobleman might openly keep a mistress, and his dalliances in taverns or brothels might be winked at as a sign of virility. It is a sin, yes, but a common and largely private one for him. For you, the rules are entirely different. From your first menstruation, you are guarded like a precious, fragile treasure. A conversation with a man who is not your kin, a smile deemed too familiar, being seen in the wrong place at the wrong time, any of these can be enough to start a rumor. And a rumor, once it takes hold, can be as damning as a proven fact. Now, imagine the worst has happened. You have been accused of adultery. Perhaps the accusation is true, born of a loveless marriage and a moment of human connection. Or perhaps it is entirely false, a malicious lie spun by a rival or a spurned suitor. In the eyes of the law, the truth is secondary to the accusation itself, which has already stained your husband's honor. The process of justice is swift and merciless. Your accuser is often your own husband, and he may act as both judge and executioner. In some early Germanic legal codes, a husband had the right to kill both his wife and her lover if he caught them in the act. While this became less common in later centuries, the right of a husband to inflict brutal, non-lethal punishment remained. Consider a common punishment practiced in various parts of medieval Europe: forced public confession and penance. But this is no quiet affair in a church confessional. You might be stripped to your shift-a-thin, coarse undergarment and forced to stand before the church congregation on Sunday, a candle in one hand, a rod in the other. The priest would announce your sin to the entire village, to every person you have ever known. He details your transgression, turning your most private moments into public spectacle. Then, as a symbol of your penance, you might be whipped, sometimes by the priest himself, other times by your own husband. The sting of the whip on your back is a sharp, clean pain compared to the burning fire of the humiliation, as you stand there, half naked and weeping, before the cold eyes of your neighbors. This ritual might be repeated for several consecutive weeks, etching your shame into the community's memory. But often it was worse. The goal was to mark you permanently, to turn your body into a walking testament to your crime. The punishment of nose cutting, or rhinotomy, was a brutal practice found in some legal codes. A woman's beauty was considered part of her value and a source of her seductive power. To disfigure her face by slicing off her nose was to destroy both. It was a visceral act of symbolic castration, robbing you of the very beauty that was thought to have led you to sin. It made you a pariah, instantly recognizable. For the rest of your life, you would carry the physical evidence of your shame. People would avert their eyes, or stare with a mixture of pity and revulsion. You were rendered unmarriageable, an outcast. Even your hair, a potent symbol of femininity and allure, could be used against you. Being shorn of your hair was another common punishment. You would be held down while a man with a rough blade hacked away your long tresses, leaving you with a butchered, shorn scalp. St. Paul had written that a woman's hair was her glory. To remove it was to remove her honor. It was a visual declaration that you had fallen from grace, that you had abandoned your rightful, modest femininity. The term unchastity itself was terrifyingly vague. It could mean adultery, but it could also mean premarital sex. If you were an unmarried woman found to be pregnant, you faced the full wrath of the community. You had not only sinned, but you had produced living, undeniable evidence of that sin. You would be lucky to escape with a public whipping or a fine. In some places, the punishments were more severe, designed to isolate you completely. You could be banished from the village, cast out to fend for yourself, pregnant and alone. For a woman with no means of support, this was often a death sentence. In this world, your body is not your own. It is a vessel, a property, a symbol. Every aspect of it, your face, your hair, your womb, policed. The punishments for sins of the flesh were designed to be deeply personal and irreversibly public. They were meant to do more than inflict pain. They sought to reclaim your body from you, to overwrite your identity with the single, bloody word, whore. They aimed to break the connection between your mind and your body, turning your own physical form into a source of perpetual shame and a lifelong prison. The sentence has been passed. Your crime, whether it was adultery, prostitution, or some other perceived offense against public moralsis, now to be inscribed not just on a court record, but onto the very landscape of your life. The punishment extends beyond the pain of a whip or a blade. It is a meticulously choreographed ritual of social death. It is the parade of shame. Let us imagine the morning of your ordeal. You are taken from a holding cell or your own home, not to a private whipping post, but to the center of town. Here, your degradation begins. Your outer garments are removed, leaving you in a thin linen shift that does little to protect you from the cold or the sea of eyes. Then, the shaving begins. A man with a rough hand and a shears or a blade grips your head. He doesn't just cut your hair, he hacks at it, shearing it close to the scalp. Each handful of hair that falls to the ground feels like a part of your identity being stripped away. In a world where a woman's long hair is her glory, as the church taught, this act is a profound statement. You are now without glory, without honor. But this is only the prelude. The true purpose of the day is movement. It is a perambulation of shame. You might be forced to walk barefoot, the sharp stones and filthy ground of the medieval street cutting into your soles. Sometimes, you would be led by a rope, like livestock. In other, more elaborate rituals, you would be placed on a cart, facing backward on a donkea, symbol of foolishness and derisions, so that all could see you. The procession begins. A town crier or a bailiff walks ahead of you, ringing a bell or blowing a horn to attract maximum attention. He loudly and repeatedly proclaims your name and your crime. Hear ye, hear ye. This is Agnes, wife of John, taken in adultery. Let her be a warning to all. Your most personal failing is now public entertainment, shouted for all to hear. The procession deliberately follows a specific symbolic route. It passes the church, where your sin has offended God. It passes the marketplace, where you have disrupted the town's good order. It passes the houses of the most prominent citizens, to show that their authority is being upheld. Crucially, it passes by your own front door, to fully humiliate you before your family, and anchor the shame to your home. The crowd is an essential actor in this drama. Their participation is not just allowed, it is encouraged. This is their chance to vocally enforce the moral boundaries of their world. They hurl not only insults, but also physical objects. You might be pelted with rotting vegetables, animal dung, mud, and rocks. The stench is overpowering, the impacts painful and startling. You try to shield your face, but you are exposed, vulnerable. The jeers, the laughter, the self-righteous condemnations from people you have known your whole life create a wall of sound that is more deafening than any physical blow. In some traditions, the punishment was more specific to the crime. An adulterous couple might be tied together, back to back, and paraded through the town in a grotesque parody of their illicit union. They would be forced to stumble along together, bound by the very sin they committed in secret. This ordeal is not designed simply to cause temporary pain and embarrassment. Its goals are much deeper and more permanent. Firstly, it serves as a powerful deterrent. Every woman watching this spectacle, your friends, your sisters, your daughters, receives a clear message about the consequences of transgression. Her fear becomes another bar in the unseen cage. Secondly, it is a ritual of purification for the community. In their view, your sin has polluted the town, and by publicly casting you out and shaming you, they believe they are cleansing themselves, restoring the moral order. Finally, and most devastatingly for you, it is an act of permanent branding. Even after the cuts on your feet have healed and the bruises have faded, the mark remains. You are no longer Agnes, the woman who makes good cheese or tells funny stories. You are Agnes, the one who was paraded on the cart. This mark is invisible, yet everyone can see it. It will affect every transaction you make, every conversation you have. It will follow your children. Your social standing is shattered, your reputation annihilated. You are pushed to the absolute margins of society. While a man might be able to recover from a public punishment, perhaps through military service or by moving to a new town, your options are far more limited. This single, organized, communal act of cruelty is designed to ensure that you never forget your place, and that no one else does either. It is a life sentence served outside of prison walls, in the open-air prison of your own disgraced community. We retreat now from the public square and the town crier, back across the threshold of your own home. For a medieval woman, this was your designated sphere of influence, the one place you were supposed to rule, the domus. But this small kingdom of the hearth and larder was not a sanctuary. It was a workshop, a production center, and a place of immense responsibility. And failure within its walls, failure to perform your duties to the expected standard, invited a unique and insidious form of punishment tone that was often private, unregulated, and all the more terrifying for it. Your life is one of relentless labor. From before the sun rises until long after it sets, you are in motion. You are responsible for everything that makes a household function. You grind the grain, you bake the bread, you tend the vegetable garden, you milk the cow or goat, you salt and preserve meat for the winter, you spin the wool, you weave the cloth, you sew the clothes, and you raise the children. This is not housework in the modern sense. This is a constant battle for survival. The well-being of your entire family rests directly on your shoulders and the skill of your hands. This relentless pressure creates endless opportunities for failure. Let us consider one of the most common female-led industries, brewing ale. In many parts of medieval Europe, alewife was a respectable and vital profession. Ale was a staple of the daily diet for everyone, men, women, and children. It was a primary source of calories, and, because the water was often unsafe, a safer source of hydration. You, as the brewer, held a position of public trust, but this trust was a double-edged sword. Imagine a batch goes wrong. Perhaps the yeast was bad, the temperature fluctuated, or the malt was of poor quality. You produce a batch of ale that is weak, sour, or ropey. You have not just made a mistake, you have committed a public offense. When the town's official ale taster, or ale conner, makes his rounds and declares your product unfit, the consequences can be immediate and humiliating. You might be fined a significant sum, money your family cannot afford to lose. Worse, you could be sentenced to a public shaming, perhaps being paraded through the streets holding a pitcher of your foul brew, or even being forced to sit on the cucking stool, as we have already seen. Your professional reputation, your very livelihood, is destroyed by a single bad batch. The same applies to your other domestic duties. If the bread you bake is found to be underweight by the market officials, you are a thief and can be dragged through the streets with the loaf tied around your neck. If the cloth you weave is shoddy, your reputation suffers. You live under a constant cloud of performance anxiety, where the slightest error can have devastating social and economic consequences. However, the most common and feared punishment within the home came not from any official, but from your husband. He was your legal master, and the law, custom, and church all affirmed his right to correct you. The concept of domestic discipline was widely accepted. A popular medieval proverb stated, "A woman, a dog, and a walnut tree, the more you beat them, the better they be." This wasn't just a crude joke. It reflected a deeply held belief that female insubordination required physical correction for the good of the household and the woman's own soul. So, what constituted a punishable offense in his eyes? The definition was entirely at his discretion. Did you burn the evening stew? Did you speak back to him when he was in a foul mood? Did you fail to show proper deference to his visiting relatives? Did you question how he spent money? Any of these could be deemed disobedience, a legitimate cause for chastisement. Imagine the scene. It is late. The children are asleep. Your husband is displeased. The argument begins, your voice rising in frustration or defense. For him, this is the final straw. His authority has been challenged. He is not abusing you in his mind. He is restoring order. The punishment might be a swift, hard slap across the face, a blow from his fist, or he might grab a stick, the one conveniently kept by the hearth for this very purpose. The rule of thumb, a later myth, has its conceptual roots here. The belief that a man could beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb was a reflection of the idea that there were reasonable limits. But in the privacy of your home, with no one to intervene, such limits were meaningless. The terror of this reality is its unpredictability and its intimacy. The same hands that might hold you in a rare moment of tenderness are the ones that can be raised against you without warning. The place that is supposed to be your sanctuary is also your prison. You learn to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the tightening of his jaw, the look in his eye. You learn to tread carefully, to choose your words, to swallow your anger, to become small and invisible, to avoid provoking his wrath. There is no authority to whom you can appeal. The parish priest would likely tell you to be more obedient. The neighbors would turn a blind eye, believing it a private family matter. Secular law rarely intervened, unless the beating was so severe that it left you unable to perform your household duties, at which point it became a crime against your husband's economic assetnot, a crime against your person. This constant threat of private, sanctioned violence was perhaps the most pervasive punishment of all. It did not require a public parade or a special instrument. Its tools were mundane: a hand, a belt, a wooden spoon. Its stage was the familiar space around your own hearth, and its legacy was a quiet, crushing fear that permeated every single day of your life. The evidence is flimsy. Your neighbor's accusation hangs in the air, a poisonous cloud of he said, she said. You have sworn your innocence on a holy relic, but your accuser has done the same. In a world with no forensic science, no detectives, no reliable way to determine truth from falsehood, the legal system often reached an impasse. It is at this moment of profound uncertainty that medieval justice turned to a higher authority, resorting to a method of trial that was both terrifying and, to the medieval mind, perfectly logical: the ordeal. They believed they were asking God himself to provide the verdict. For you, a woman, already vulnerable and viewed with suspicion, trial by ordeal was a particularly horrifying prospect. It was a system stacked against you, where your fate would be decided not by evidence, but by your body's reaction to extreme physical trauma. The fundamental belief was that a righteous and omnipotent God would intervene to protect the innocent. He would perform a small, localized miracle to vindicate the truthful and expose the liar. The burden of proof, therefore, was on you, and the test was often one of survival. Let us consider one of the most common forms: the ordeal by water. There were two main variations. First, the ordeal of hot water. Imagine you are led into the church, a place you normally associate with sanctuary. A cauldron of water boils furiously over a fire. The priest, chanting prayers and swinging a censer of incense, sanctifies the water, officially placing the proceedings under God's watchful eye. Your accusers and the rest of the community look on, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and pious gravity. The priest or bailiff then instructs you to plunge your arm into the boiling water, up to the elbow, and retrieve a stone or a holy ring from the bottom. The pain is unimaginable, a scalding, searing agony that shoots through your entire body. You pull your arm out, flesh red and blistering, a scream catching in your throat, but the trial is not over. Your scalded arm is immediately bound in cloth and sealed with the priest's sigil. You are then to wait for 3 days. This period of waiting is its own unique form of torture. You are in immense pain, but you are also suspended in a state of terrifying limbo. You pray frantically, desperately hoping for that divine miracle. At the end of the 3 days, you are brought back before the priest and the community. The bandages are ceremoniously unwrapped. They examine your wound. If the burn is healing cleanly, without festering or infection, it is a sign from God. You are declared innocent. But if the wound is infected, blistered, and weeping pusa, near certainty, in an era with no understanding of germs or sterile dressing sit, is a sign of God's judgment against you. You are guilty. God has revealed your lie by allowing the wound to putrefy. Your guilt is proven not by evidence, but by the natural biological processes of your own body. Even more terrifying was the ordeal of cold water, or swimming a witch. This method became infamous during the witch hunts, but had roots in earlier legal traditions. You are taken to a river or a deep pond, the same body of water used for the cucking stool. Your right thumb is bound to your left big toe, and your left thumb to your right big toe, trussing you up in a way that makes swimming impossible. A rope is tied around your waist, held by a man on the riverbank, the only flimsy precaution against you simply vanishing beneath the surface. The logic here was symbolic. Water used for baptism was considered pure, an element of God. It was believed that this pure element would reject anything unholy. After prayers are said, you are thrown into the water. The crowd watches intently. If you sink, the water has accepted you. You are innocent. You are hastily pulled from the water, half drowned but vindicated. However, if your body bobs to the surface and you float, it is a sign that the pure water has rejected you as a tainted, sinful creature. You are guilty. It is a horrifying catch-22. To survive the ordeal by floating is to condemn yourself to a certain and far more brutal execution for the crime you were accused of. To be proven innocent is to come within moments of drowning. A third common method was the ordeal by fire, or ordeal by hot iron. Here, you would be forced to carry a red-hot bar of iron for a set number of paces, usually 9. Or you would have to walk barefoot across glowing hot plowshares laid end to end on the church floor. As with the hot water ordeal, your burned hands or feet would be bound and inspected 3 days later. The verdict depended entirely on the state of your healing. For a woman, these trials were not an abstract legal process. They were a visceral assault. They bypassed any attempt at rational argument and went straight to the torture of your physical body. It was a system predicated on the belief that your pain would reveal the state of your soul. Your pleas of innocence were meaningless. Your character was irrelevant. All that mattered was how your flesh reacted to fire or water, how your wounds healed in a world rife with infection. It was the ultimate abdication of human responsibility, placing your life, your reputation, and your fate not in the hands of a jury of your peers, but into the unpredictable and terrifying hands of God, a God whose silence in the face of your agony was always interpreted as guilt. We must now take a step into the deepest darkness of the medieval psyche, into a place where fear, superstition, and theology condensed into a single, lethal storm. This is where the punishments cease to be about social order and become about a cosmic battle for the fate of Christendom. It is where you, an ordinary woman, could be transformed from a neighbor into a monster, from a folk healer into the devil's own bride. This transformation was not instantaneous. It was a slow, creeping process, a change in the very air people breathe. For years, you were a fixture in your community, perhaps respected, perhaps feared, but always necessary. You were the wise woman. You were the one called when a birth was difficult. You knew how to turn a baby in the womb, what herbs to make into a tea to ease the mother's pain. The men, including the priest, stayed away from the birthing room, a place of blood and mystery they deemed unclean. But you went in. You held the mother's hand. You cleaned the newborn. You cut the cord. You stood at the very threshold of life. Or perhaps your knowledge was of the earth. You knew the secrets of the forest and field. You knew that willow bark could soothe a headache, that a poultice of comfrey could knit a broken bone, that foxglove, in a tiny careful dose, could steady a fluttering heart. When a child was feverish, a cow was sick, or a wound refused to heal, it was your cottage they sought out. Your knowledge was not learned from books. It was a legacy passed down from your mother, who learned it from her mother before her. It was ancient, practical, And it worked. You were a healer. Maybe you were simply a woman who lived alone. A widow, perhaps, who had outlived her husband and children. You were self-sufficient. You kept a cat to chase away the mice that would eat your stored grain. Your independence itself made you an anomaly in a world where a woman was defined by her relationship to men. You were beholden to no one, and that made you unsettling. For a long time, this was your place. You were on the margins, perhaps, but you had a function. Then, the world began to change. Famine swept through the land, crops withering in the fields. A new plague, a sweating sickness, carried away children in the night. The Lord raised taxes yet again, pushing families to the brink of starvation. In a world saturated with the idea of divine providence, such relentless misfortune could not be random. It could not be chalked up to bad weather or poor sanitation. It had to be an act of malice. It required a cause. It required a culprit. And slowly, subtly, the community's gaze turned toward you. The baby you delivered last spring, the one who died of a fever a month later, they no longer remember your help. They remember only that your hands were the last to touch him. The neighbor whose cow's milk soured? He recalls the harsh words you had with him last week over a wandering chicken. The failed harvest? It began after you were seen walking the edge of the fields at twilight, muttering to yourself. The very skills that once made you valuable are now reinterpreted through a new, dark lens. This shift is amplified from the church pulpit. Theologians and traveling preachers are spreading a new and terrifying idea. They speak not just of simple sorcery or maleficium, the casting of a harmful spell, but of a grand conspiracy. They speak of diabolism. They claim there is a secret army of witches, mostly women, who have renounced God. They have made a formal pact with Satan himself, trading their immortal souls for petty temporal powers. They meet in secret nocturnal gatherings, or sabbats, where they desecrate the cross, perform obscene rituals, and pledge their allegiance to the Lord of Darkness. You are no longer just a woman who might have cursed a cow. In their inflamed imagination, you are now an enemy combatant in a holy war. You are a heretic. Everything about you is twisted into evidence. Your knowledge of herbs is not folk wisdom. It is a diabolical power granted by your demonic master. Your ability as a midwife is a cover for your true purpose: to murder unbaptized infants and use their rendered fat to make flying ointments. The cat you keep for company is not a pet. It is a familiar, a demon in animal form assigned to assist in your wicked deeds. Your social isolation is not a consequence of widowhood. It is proof that you have rejected the company of good Christians for the society of devils. Your every word and action is meticulously deconstructed and reassembled into a portrait of a monster. The accusation, when it finally comes, is no longer about brewing bad ale or scolding your husband. It is an accusation of apostasy, of being a traitor to God and humanity. The spectral fear of witchcraft, once a fringe folk belief, has coalesced into a rigid, deadly ideology. And you, the wise woman, the healer, the lonely widow, find yourself standing at the center of the storm. The transition is complete. You have been unmade as a person and remade as a witch. And the world is now ready to use a new, systematic form of punishment, one designed specifically to expose and destroy the devil's bride. The fear has been sown. The whispers in the village have coalesced into a formal accusation. But for the men in power, the local magistrate, the bishop, the learned judge, these scattered fears and folk beliefs were often chaotic, lacking structure, and most importantly, lacking authority. How could one be sure? What were the proper procedures? This uncertainty, at times, could be a fragile shield for you, the accused. But that was about to change. For now, onto the scene comes a book. And it is a book that will become one of the most infamous and blood-soaked publications in human history. Imagine, for a moment, the year is 1487. The new technology of the printing press, a near miraculous invention, is spreading across Europe. For the first time, ideas can be replicated with perfect fidelity and distributed on a mass scale. And from one of these presses emerges a dense, scholarly-looking volume written in Latin, the language of God and the educated elite. Its title is the Malleus Maleficarum. In English, the Hammer of Witches. This is not a collection of fables. It presents itself as a work of immense intellectual and theological rigor, written by a respected inquisitor of the Catholic Church, Heinrich Kramer. It is a textbook, a legal manual, a handbook for a holy war, and in its pages, all the free-floating anxieties, misogynistic tropes, and rural superstitions of the age are gathered, organized, and forged into a sharp, coherent, and deadly weapon of law. For the witch hunter, it provides a blueprint. For you, the accused, it seals your doom. The book is methodically divided into 3 parts. The first part is dedicated to a single crucial task, proving beyond all shadow of a doubt that witchcraft is not only real, but that it is the most heinous of all possible crimes, combining heresy, apostasy, and carnal evil. It refutes anyone who would dare to claim that witchcraft is mere illusion or fancy. And it argues, with relentless and obsessive focus, that this great evil is overwhelmingly the domain of women. The authors ask the question, why are women the chief instruments of Satan? And they provide a litany of answers, cloaking ancient prejudice in the language of scholastic philosophy. You are, the book explains, more credulous than men. Your minds are more open to the lies of the devil. You are more carnal, more driven by lusts of the flesh, which the devil can easily exploit. The authors even engage in a twisted form of etymology, arguing that the word femina, for woman, comes from fe and minus, meaning less faith. Your very nature, your biology, your intellect, which they compare to that of a child, makes you defective, imperfect, and thus a natural vessel for evil. It takes the old slur of daughter of Eve and elevates it to a legal and theological principle. The second part of the Malleus Maleficarum is a detailed and lurid catalog of horrors. It is a checklist of depravity that interrogators will later use against you. It describes, in clinical detail, how you supposedly make your pact with the devil. It speaks of the obscene kiss you must give him as a sign of fealty. It details your nocturnal flights to the witch's sabbat, the copulation with demons known as incubi and succubi, the sacrificing of infants, the concoction of magical ointments from their rendered fat. It explains how you can steal a man's virility, cause livestock to sicken and die, and conjure hailstorms to destroy the crops of your enemies. By reading this section, a magistrate is not just learning about witchcraft. He is being handed a pre-written script for your confession. These are the things you will be made to admit to, whether you have ever imagined them or not. But it is the third and final section that is the true hammer. This is the practical guide to prosecuting a witch. It is a systematic dismantling of every legal protection you might have had. The Malleus advises that a formal accusation against a witch is often initiated by public rumor, the very whispers that first condemned you. It argues that a witness testifying against you can and should remain anonymous, because you would surely use your malevolent powers to take revenge on them otherwise. You can now be accused by a faceless enemy, their motives forever hidden from you. You are to be denied a proper advocate or lawyer to defend you, for the crime of defending a witch is, in itself, a sign of heresy. The book provides a detailed guide to interrogation. It recommends that you be stripped naked and your entire body be shaved, so that the inquisitors can search for the devil's mark, an area on your skin, like a mole or a birthmark, where the devil was said to have touched you, rendering it insensible to pain. A man would then take a long, sharp needle and prick your body, over and over, searching for a spot from which you did not flinch or cry out. And then comes its guidance on torture. The malleus authorizes its use with cold, bureaucratic precision. It frames torture not as a way to produce a confession, but as a way to help you tell the truth that is already presumed. It provides a terrifying, no-win logic. If you confess quickly under torture, it is proof of your guilt. If you withstand the pain and remain silent, it is not proof of your innocence. Rather, it is proof that the devil is giving you supernatural strength to resist. Your stoicism becomes further evidence against you. The book recommends escalating the torture, showing you the instruments beforehand to break your will, lying to you with false promises of mercy if you confess. Mercy, in this context, often meant that you would be strangled to death before your body was committed to the flames. With the arrival of the Malleus Maleficarum in the hands of your local authorities, your situation has changed irrevocably. You are no longer just a person caught in the crossfire of village superstitions. You are now a case file. You are a subject to be processed through a formal, documented, and supposedly infallible systema bureaucratic engine of persecution, oiled by misogyny and fueled by pain. This book has given your persecutors the one thing they lacked: a script, a justification, and the unholy sanction of the printed word. The heavy door of the dungeon slams shut, and the sound echoes in the small stone-walled chamber. The only light comes from a single sputtering torch that casts long, dancing shadows. The air is cold and damp, thick with the smell of stale fear, sweat, and mildew. You have been isolated here for days, perhaps weeks. You have been given just enough bread and water to keep you alive, your sleep constantly interrupted by the guards. You are already exhausted, disoriented, and terrified. This weakening of your mind and body is not a side effect of imprisonment. It is the first, crucial stage of the process that is about to unfold. The men enter the room. One is a magistrate, a clerk with ink-stained fingers, ready to write down every word you say. The others are different. They are grim-faced, muscular, their sleeves rolled up. They do not look at you as a person, but as a problem to be solved, a lock to be picked. And they carry with them the keys. These are the tools of their trade: ropes, pulleys, metal boots, iron tongs. They lay them out on a wooden table with a methodical calm that is more chilling than any overt threat. Following the advice of the Malleus Maleficarum, they begin by showing you the instruments, explaining in a detached, clinical tone what each one is designed to do. This is a chance to confess now, they might say, to avoid the unpleasantness. But you, still clinging to your innocence, refuse. So the process begins. Its goal is simple: to inflict a degree of pain so overwhelming that your mind breaks, your will shatters, and you say whatever they want you to say. The word torture does not do justice to the cold, calculated science of it. This is not random, angry violence. It is a systematic dismantling of your humanity. Perhaps they start with a strappado. Your hands are tied behind your back, and the rope is looped over a pulley on the ceiling. You are hoisted into the air, your feet dangling inches above the floor. The entire weight of your body pulls down on your arms, twisting them backward and up from their sockets. The pain is a white-hot explosion in your shoulders. It feels as if your arms are being torn from your body. You hang there, moaning or screaming, every breath an agony. To increase the pressure, they might add weights to your ankles. Then comes the jerk. They release the rope slightly, letting you drop a foot or two before it snaps taut again. The shock dislocates your shoulders with a sickening pop. You might pass out from the pain. They will douse you with cold water to wake you up. The clerk, his face impassive, will repeat the question: "Did you dance with the devil in the forest? Confess." Or perhaps they will turn to the leg screws or Spanish boot. This is a metal vise, or sometimes just pieces of wood, fitted around your shins. The torturer slowly tightens the device with a screw mechanism. The pressure builds, compressing your flesh and muscle against the bone. Then you feel a cracking sensation as your shin bones begin to fracture under the immense, unyielding pressure. The pain is not sharp and sudden, but a deep, grinding, and nauseating agony that seems to go on forever. Through the haze of pain, you hear the scribe's monotonous voice. Who were the others at the Sabbat? Give us their names. Confess. Water torture was another favored method. You are tied down to a board, a cloth stuffed into your mouth. They then begin to slowly pour water onto the cloth. You are forced to swallow and swallow and swallow until your stomach is filled to a bursting point. The feeling of drowning while on dry land, the suffocating pressure, the certainty that you will explode from the inside is a unique and mind-breaking horror. Throughout all this, there is the relentless psychological assault. They whisper in your ear that the devil has abandoned you. They tell you that your friends have already confessed and named you as their accomplice. They promise you a quick, merciful death if you cooperate. They offer you a cup of water, a brief moment of relief, then plunge you back into the agony, demonstrating their absolute control over every aspect of your existence. This process can go on for hours, even days, sessions of torture interspersed with periods of isolation in the dark. Your mind, starved of sleep and battered by pain, begins to buckle. The line between reality and nightmare dissolves. The lurid, demonic fantasies they have been shouting at you, the Sabbats, the flying ointments, the demonic pacts begin to seem more real than the solid walls of your cell. You no longer know what is true. All you know is the pain, and you know there is only one way to make it stop. And so, you confess. You give them the story they want to hear. The words spill out of you in a torrent of sobs and broken whispers. Yes, you say, I met the devil. He was a tall man in black. Yes, we danced. Yes, I kissed him. Then they ask for the names of the others. And here is the most diabolical part of the process. To save yourself from more pain, you must condemn others. You name the neighbor who first accused you. You name the midwife you have always been jealous of. You name women you barely know. You name anyone whose face swims up in the fog of your agony. Your confession becomes a seed, and from it, a whole new round of accusations and tortures will spring. The scribe writes it all down, your delirious words neatened into a formal, legal document. When it is done, they may guide your broken hand to sign it. You have now officially, legally, and voluntarily confessed to being a witch. The torture was not to discover the truth, it was to manufacture it. And as they lead your broken body from the chamber, you are left with the hollow, soul-destroying knowledge that you have not only damned yourself, but you have become an instrument in the damnation of others, a link in an unending chain of pain. The ordeal of your trial is over. Your forced confession, meticulously recorded by the clerk, has been read and accepted by the court. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, determined long before you ever set foot in the torture chamber. You are guilty. Now, all that remains is the sentence, the final act in this grim theater. The community, which once whispered its suspicions, now gathers to witness its judgment made manifest. For you and others like you, there were primarily two paths to the end, each one freighted with its own specific terror and symbolism, the hangman's noose and the cleansing fire. The choice of method often depended on geography and the specific nature of your crime. In England, for instance, where witchcraft was seen more as a felony, a crime against your neighbors, than as a heresy against God, the typical sentence was hanging. Imagine the final morning. You are led from your cell into the stark light of day. A rough cart is waiting. The journey to the gallows, usually erected on a hill just outside of town, is another kind of shame parade, a sequel to the one that may have begun your ordeal. This time, however, the mood of the crowd is different. The jeering and ridicule have been replaced by a kind of solemn, morbid anticipation. You arrive at the site. The gallows is a crude, imposing wooden structure, stark against the skyline. It is a symbol of state power. You are made to climb a ladder onto a platform or are left standing in the cart. The hangman, a professional shunned by society for his gruesome trade, works with an unceremonious efficiency. He places the noose around your neck, the coarse rope biting into your skin. A hood may be placed over your head, plunging you into a terrifying, suffocating darkness. Or you may be left to see the faces in the crowd, a sea of spectators watching your final moments. A prayer is said, often drowned out by the noise of the crowd. The priest might exhort you to make a final confession and repent, to save your soul even as your body is forfeit. Then comes the moment. If you are in the cart, the horse is slapped and jolts forward, leaving you dangling. If you are on a platform, a trapdoor opens beneath your feet. The drop is not long enough to break your neck. This is not a swift, modern execution. Instead, you are left to die of strangulation. Your body convulses, kicking and twisting at the end of the rope. The pressure in your head is immense, the air cut off from your burning lungs. It is an agonizing, slow, and undignified death, lasting for several minutes. You are a public spectacle to the very end, your final, desperate struggles for life, serving as the ultimate warning to all who watch. After you are finally still, your body might be left hanging for hours or days, a gruesome deterrent, slowly turning in the wind. But in continental Europe, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire, your crime of witchcraft was viewed as heresy, a direct treason against God. Such a profound spiritual stain could not be erased by a simple rope. It required a more dramatic, more symbolic purification. It required fire. The execution by burning was the supreme ritual of punishment. It was a grand public event, often declared a local holiday to ensure the largest possible audience. In the town square, a thick wooden stake has been driven into the ground. Around it, a massive pile of wood, some of it green to produce more smoke, has been carefully arranged. It is the pyre. You are led to the stake, stripped to your shift. You are chained securely to the post, unable to move. Sometimes, a bag of gunpowder would be tied around your neck, a small act of mercy from the executioner, intended to hasten your death when the flames reached it. The crowd presses in, a mix of piety and morbid fascination on their faces. They believe they are watching a righteous act, the physical removal of a great evil from their midst. A high-ranking priest or magistrate formally reads your sentence one last time, condemning your body to the temporal flames and, they pray, saving your soul from the eternal ones. Then, the executioner brings forth a torch. He methodically lights the pyre at several points. At first, you only feel the heat. Then the thick, acrid smoke begins to billow up, choking you, filling your lungs, making you cough and sputter. It stings your eyes, blinding you. Through the haze, you can hear the roar of the flames and the roar of the crowd, the two sounds merging into a single, terrifying wall of noise. Then the fire itself touches you. The pain is absolute, a sensation so overwhelming that it erases all thought. Your skin blackens and splits. Your hair ignites in a flash. Your screams are lost in the crackling of the wood. For the audience, this is the climactic moment. They are witnessing a ritual of purification. In their minds, the flames that are consuming your flesh are also cleansing the community of your demonic taint. Death by burning is horrifically slow. You die not from the flames themselves, but from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning from the smoke, heat stroke, and the shock from the severe burns. It is an agony that can last for what feels like an eternity. Finally, your tormented body goes limp. But even then, the ritual is not over. The fire is kept burning until your body is reduced to nothing more than ash and a few charred bones. It is the ultimate annihilation. The authorities wanted to ensure that no part of you remained, no relic for any sympathizer to collect, no grave for your family to visit. You were to be erased from the earth, wiped from memory, as if you had never been. Whether by rope or by fire, your execution was more than just the end of your life. It was the final, brutal, public statement of a society convinced it was at war with evil, and you had been cast as the enemy. Not all punishments ended at the gallows or the pyre. There existed another fate, a silent, living death, reserved for women who were not necessarily criminals in the conventional sense, but were simply inconvenient, unwanted, or defiant in ways that could not be easily prosecuted as witchcraft or adultery. For these women, their sentence was to be erased from the world, their lives forfeit not to a sudden, violent end, but to a slow, monotonous decay behind the high stone walls of a convent or a prison cell. This was the punishment of immurement, both literal and metaphorical. Let us first consider the convent. In the medieval imagination, the monastery and the convent stood as bastions of piety, serene islands of prayer in a chaotic world. For some women, this was a genuine calling. They sought a life of contemplation, study, and devotion to God, embracing the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience with a willing heart. For them, the convent was a sanctuary, one of the few places where a woman could pursue an intellectual life, exercise authority as an abbess, and escape the dangers and drudgery of marriage and childbirth. But for countless others, the convent was not a choice. It was a prison sentence handed down by their own families. Imagine you are the second or third daughter of a nobleman. Your older sister has been married off with a substantial dowry to secure a political alliance. Your father's lands cannot be divided further, and the family cannot afford another expensive dowry to find you a suitable husband. You are a financial liability. To have you remain at home, unmarried, is a drain on resources and a potential source of scandal. The solution is simple and socially acceptable. You will become a bride of Christ. The decision is made without your consent. Your protests are dismissed as youthful folly, or, worse, as a sign of a sinful, worldly spirit. You are dressed in fine clothes for the ceremony, a mockery of a wedding, where you are formally given, not to a husband in whom you might have found companionship, but to the church. After the ceremony, you pass through the heavy convent doors. They swing shut behind you with a dead, final sound. This is the last time you will ever see the outside world. Life inside is a rigid, unyielding routine. Your fine clothes are replaced with a coarse, plain habit. Your hair, once a source of pride, is shorn. Your name may even be changed. You are stripped of your former identity. Your days are dictated by the liturgical hours, a cycle of 8 prayer services, beginning with matins long before dawn and ending with compline in the dark of night. In between prayers, there is silent, supervised labor. Tending the convent garden, working in the scriptorium copying manuscripts, or spinning and weaving. Silence is the rule. Meaningful conversation is restricted or forbidden. Your diet is simple and meager. You are cut off from everyone you have ever known. Family visits, if allowed at all, are brief and conducted through a thick grill, a physical barrier symbolizing your separation from the secular world. You are surrounded by other women, many of whom are just as unwilling and unhappy as you are. The convent, far from being a place of serene sisterhood, could be a hotbed of petty rivalries, resentment, and quiet desperation. For you, this is not a holy calling. It is a life sentence of profound loneliness and thwarted potential, a daily reminder that your family valued its wealth and status more than your freedom and happiness. A darker fate awaited women accused of serious heresy but who, for one reason or another, were spared the flames. Perhaps they offered a last-minute recantation, or their crime was deemed more intellectual than diabolical. For them, the sentence was often perpetual imprisonment. The church had its own prisons, often a lightless, airless cell in the dungeon of a bishop's castle or built into the wall of a monastery. Here, the immurement was literal. You would be placed in a small stone room, sometimes with no window at all. The door would be sealed, sometimes even bricked up, leaving only a small slot through which a meager ration of bread and water could be passed. This was known as in pace or in peace, a horrifyingly ironic name for a sentence of being buried alive. You are left in absolute solitude and near total darkness. The days and nights bleed into one another. The cold from the stone floor seeps into your bones. The silence is broken only by the scuttling of rats and the distant, muffled sounds of a world you are no longer part of. There is no human contact beyond the hand that shoves your food through the slot. Time ceases to have meaning. Your mind, starved of all stimulation, begins to unravel. You might pace the tiny space until your feet are raw, talk to yourself, or sink into a catatonic state of utter despair. It was a punishment designed to break not just the body, but the soul. The church believed that this isolation, free from worldly distractions, would force you to contemplate your sins and beg for God's forgiveness. For you, however, it was a descent into a madness from which there was no escape. Your life had not been taken, but the essence of living community, purpose, light, and hope had been systematically extinguished, leaving only a breathing shell in a stone tomb. Whether within the regulated prison of a convent or the literal tomb of an anchor hold, this punishment represented society's solution for the woman who simply did not fit. It was a quieter, less spectacular form of destruction than the pyre, but in its slow, grinding erasure of self, it was every bit as brutal. We have walked through the public spectacles of shame. We have stood in the suffocating darkness of the torture chamber, and we have felt the heat from the pyre. Now, we must step back and consider the invisible consequences of this world of punishment. What was the effect of all this? Not just on the women who were bridled, dunked, and burned, but on the millions who were not. What was the collective psychological cost for every woman who simply bore witness, living her entire life under the shadow of this brutal and unpredictable system? The scars left by this era were not only etched onto the bodies of the condemned, but were branded deeply onto the souls of the survivors. Imagine you are an ordinary village woman. You have committed no crime. You are a dutiful wife and mother. You attend church. You are quiet and pious. But your neighbor, a woman you have known since childhood, has just been paraded through the streets in a scold's bridle for arguing with her husband. Last year, a widow at the edge of town was accused of witchcraft after a child's sudden death, and you saw the smoke from her pyre rising above the trees. The punishments you witness are not distant stories. They are visceral, terrifying realities that play out among your own people. This proximity to sanctioned cruelty cultivates a deep and persistent atmosphere of fear. This fear shapes your every interaction. It forces you into a state of constant, wearying self-monitoring. Every word you speak is weighed and measured before it leaves your lips. Is this opinion too strong? Will this complaint be interpreted as scolding? Will this joke be seen as frivolous, or worse, profane? You learn to present a carefully curated version of yourself to the world, a mask of placid conformity. Your inner life, with its frustrations, its ambitions, its complex thoughts, is driven deep underground, hidden away where it cannot be seen or judged. This constant act of self-censorship is exhausting. It stifles your spirit and fosters a sense of alienation even from yourself. The system also functions by turning neighbor against neighbor, shattering the bonds of community that should have been a source of strength. The Malleus Maleficarum and similar doctrines encouraged people to watch one another for signs of deviance. That friendly chat with a neighbor over the fence becomes tinged with suspicion. Did you say something that could be misconstrued? Can you trust her with your troubles? Or will she use your confidences against you if she finds it advantageous? This culture of suspicion poisons the very heart of female relationships. The midwife who should be your trusted ally during childbirth could be a potential accuser or an object of accusation herself. The woman you share herb lore with could be your co-conspirator in a future trial. This manufactured distrust is a powerful tool of social control. It isolates you, preventing the formation of solidarity. A community where women fear and suspect one another is a community where they cannot organize, cannot support each other, and cannot effectively challenge the patriarchal structures that oppress them. You are atomized, each woman alone in her fear. Furthermore, This world institutionalizes a profound sense of guilt and worthlessness. From the moment you are born, the doctrine of Eve's sin tells you that you are inherently flawed, morally weaker, and prone to temptation. When you see women punished for crimes of sexuality, speech, or independence, it reinforces this indoctrination. You internalize the misogyny. You may even begin to believe it yourself. When misfortune strikes your own life, a child falls ill, your milk curdles, your first thought may not be of natural causes, but a panicked self-examination. What have I done to displease God? Is this a punishment for some private, sinful thought? You become your own inquisitor, perpetuating the psychological oppression within the confines of your own mind. For those with any nonconformist trait, a sharp intellect, a solitary nature, a physical deformity, or mental illness, this psychological burden is magnified 100-fold. You learn that to be different is to be in danger. Any deviation from the norm of the quiet, obedient, fertile wife makes you a target. You live in a state of heightened alert, constantly trying to appear as normal as possible, to shrink yourself so as not to draw the eye of accusation. This collective trauma creates a legacy that is passed down through generations. Mothers, out of a desperate love and a desire to protect their daughters, teach them the lessons they have learned. Be quiet. Be obedient. Do not draw attention to yourself. Do not seem too clever. Do not trust your neighbors. Make yourself small. These are not just words of advice. They are survival strategies, passed from mother to daughter like a sad, necessary inheritance. This is how the system perpetuates itself. The fear is so ingrained that women themselves become the enforcers, policing their own and each other's behavior, teaching their children how to live inside the cage, because they know the terrible price of trying to fly out of it. The iron of the bridle may have been removed, but the memory of its weight and the fear of its return lingers on, a ghost haunting the female psyche for centuries to come. The world is, at last, beginning to change. The embers of the last witch pyre are growing cold. The cucking stools are rotting by the riverbank, and the scold's bridle is slowly becoming a curious relic of a bygone age. This did not happen overnight. It was not a single edict or a sudden dawn of enlightenment. It was a slow, grinding, and uneven process, a gradual fading of the darkness brought about by a confluence of profound shifts in how human beings saw their world, their God, and themselves. And as we conclude our journey, we must ask, how did this reign of terror end, and what enduring echoes does it leave behind? The first great shift was in the realm of ideas. The intellectual revolution known as the Enlightenment began to gain traction in the late 17th and 18th centuries. Thinkers like Voltaire, Locke, and Montesquieu championed reason, skepticism, and empirical evidence over superstition and blind faith. The old medieval worldview, which saw God's or the devil's hand in every thunderstorm and curdled pot of milk, started to give way to a search for natural causes. A failed harvest was no longer the result of a witch's curse. It was the result of drought or blight. A disease was not a demonic affliction, but a problem to be solved by the emerging sciences of medicine and biology. This new intellectual framework slowly dismantled the very foundation upon which the witch hunts and ordeals were built. If you could explain the world through natural law, you no longer needed to invent supernatural culprits. The legal system itself began a slow evolution. The idea of due process began to take shape. Judges and jurists, influenced by Enlightenment ideals, grew increasingly uncomfortable with the methods of the old courts. The use of torture to extract confessions was recognized not as a tool for revealing truth, but as a barbaric and unreliable method for producing falsehoods. The notion that an accused person should have the right to a proper defense, to face their accuser, and to be judged on the basis of credible evidence gradually became a cornerstone of modern jurisprudence. The anonymous accuser, the assumption of guilt, and the spectral evidence of the witch trials were slowly purged from the courtroom. Economic and social changes also played their part. The rise of industrialization and urbanization began to break down the small, insular, and gossip-fueled world of the medieval village. As people moved to cities, they found a degree of anonymity that was impossible in their ancestral homes. The intense, face-to-face scrutiny that had policed women's behavior for centuries began to loosen its grip. While new forms of urban misery emerged, the specific, superstitious paranoia of the village witch hunt found less fertile ground in the sprawling, impersonal city. However, the disappearance of these specific punishments did not signify an end to the persecution of women. The spirit of the Malleus Maleficarum did not vanish. It simply changed its form. The image of the female hysteric in the 19th century, for instance, bears a chilling resemblance to the medieval witch. She was seen as irrational, overly emotional, and governed by her mysterious and troublesome womb. The treatments for hysteria, which ranged from institutionalization in asylums to brutal surgeries like the clitoridectomy, were simply a medicalized version of the old impulse to control and silence the defiant woman. The underlying belief that the independent female mind and body were inherently disordered persisted, cloaked in the new language of science rather than theology. And so, what is the final legacy of this dark history? It is a stark and sober reminder of how easily societies can construct systems of belief that justify breathtaking cruelty. It shows us how power, whether patriarchal, religious, or state-sanctioned, can define a group of people as other, and, in doing so, strip them of their humanity, making any atrocity against them seem not only permissible, but necessary. The punishments we have explored are echoes in our own world. The public shaming of the stocks and the parade lives on in the digital swarms of online mobbing that seek to destroy a woman's reputation for a misspoken word. The impulse to control women's bodies continues in fierce debates over reproductive rights. The suspicion of female authority and the silencing of women's voices still resonate in boardrooms, political chambers, and online comment sections across the globe. The specific instruments of torture have been retired to museums. The laws have been rewritten. But the fear of female power, the temptation to blame the vulnerable for societal ills, and the instinct to enforce conformity through shame are perennial human frailties. The history of these punishments serves as a crucial, harrowing lesson. It teaches us to be vigilant against the easy certainties of our own age, to question the sources of authority, and to listen with empathy for the whispers in the dark, the voices of those who, even today, might be living in a cage we cannot immediately see. And in that vigilance lies our only hope of ensuring that the embers of those fires are never allowed to glow again. I hope this journey into the shadows of the past has been a thought-provoking, if somber, companion for you this evening. As the darkness deepens and you prepare for rest, may you find comfort in the knowledge that we live in a world built, in part, on the lessons learned from this immense suffering. Thank you for listening. Sleep well.